Here we are on chapter 8, the first chapter into your second book, book B. So you'll need to have that book if you don't already. Hopefully you brought it with you. If not, you can share with your neighbor. So this is the chapter on algebraic equations and inequalities. The big idea for this chapter is equations and inequalities can be used to solve problems and describe situations. You can find this on page 2, which is the beginning of chapter 8. So we have the same biblical truth from chapter 7, that is, God is without error. He is truth. He created the world. There are correct and incorrect answers to math problems with many different ways to reach the correct answer because God created us all different, so we think differently. But there's still order in math, and that God created one answer because he's organized and ordered. The biblical truth that we can apply also is that algebra comes from the Arabic word algebra, which means the reunion of broken parts. In 1 Thessalonians 5:23, it reminds us that we have parts and wholes in math, but then that verse specifically reminds us that that which is broken apart can be made whole again, reminding us that God makes us whole when we're broken. Okay, so if you move forward to pages 5 through 7, we're going to be, the beginning of lesson 8.1 is on page 5, but we're going to be in the guided practice on page 7, looking at number 6. And this is about solving equations using substitution. So I know lots of you will want to balance this equation and balance and subtract or divide the 4, but we're substituting in. So this is where you think in your head, what could be in here? So I think of the math fact. 4 times what is 20? And I know that 4 times 5 is 20. So I substitute in and I say n should equal 5. So then I take 4 times 5 and I get 20. If I don't know my math facts, I'm going to have to guess and check. And I might try 3 first and say 4 times 3 is 12. That doesn't work. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 5 is 20. So then I answer that, yes, my answer is correct. N equals 5. And you can circle it up here or rewrite it down below. Okay, so that's how you use substitution. The next section is telling us to involve subtraction or addition and to use balancing. So if you look at page 8, and we'll do number 12, it says z minus 9 equals 21. So this is using balancing with just addition or subtraction. So remember, your goal is to isolate the variable and to get the variable on one side by itself. Okay, so that means I'm going to leave this alone and leave it by itself. So I'm going to add, do the opposite operation. And what the golden rule of algebra is that you have to do what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Otherwise, it becomes unbalanced like a scale. So 9 minus 9 is 0. Negative 9 plus 9 is 0. And so I can cancel that out. And then 21 plus 9 is a positive 30. So z is equal to 30. And then continuing on, I can balance equations using multiplication and division. So if you turn to page 10, and we're going to look at number 16, just because typically when you guys did this chapter, fraction problems like this were a little bit more difficult for you. So again, the goal is to isolate the variable. So right now we know that when we have fractions, this is the same as division. So I can say this is m divided by 8. If it helps your brain to see it, you can do m divided by 8 equals 9 and rewrite it. Okay, so when I divide, what's the opposite of division? Multiplication. So I'm going to multiply by 8. So 8 divided by 8 is 1. So I have 1m essentially here now. And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I have to multiply the 9 times 8. So I have 1m is equal to 72. and 1m is the same as m. So my variable is equal to 72. And I can check it. I can go 72 divided by 8 is 9. You should know that math fact. Okay, and then addition and subtraction equations involving fractions is on the next page, page 11. Okay, so let's look at number 20. So it says 4p equals 3/4. And remember, your goal is to isolate the variable. Okay, so this is 4 times p, right? So I'm dividing because it's the opposite of multiplication. Okay, so you can write it like this. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. So that's 1p is equal to p. So p is equal to 3/4 divided by 4. So typically this is hard for your brain to understand. So you need to write 3/4 divided by 4. Hopefully that's a little bit easier for your brain to see. And now we're applying a concept from chapter 3 of how to take a fraction divided by a whole number into algebra. So all you need to do is cover this up for now and go, let me think back to chapter 3. How do I take a fraction divided by a whole number? Oh yeah, I multiply it by the reciprocal. So this whole number is the same as 4/1. So I take 3/4 multiplied by the reciprocal of 1/4, which is equal to 3 times 1, which is 3, and 4 times 4, which is 16. So p is equal to 3/16, as long as I can't simplify it, which I can't. 16 cannot divide by 3. So if you have a lot of work like this, sometimes it's super helpful to highlight where your answer is for your teacher. Okay, next lesson is lesson 8.2, writing linear equations, and that's on page 13. And this is where we learned about independent and dependent variables. So if you take the guided practice on page 15, if you look at number 2, we have Hannah and Sophia. And it says Hannah took p minutes to jog around a park. And Sophia took 12 minutes longer. So for those of you who are visual, here's Hannah, and she has p, and it says Sophia took 12 minutes longer. So she's equal to Sophia, so that's the p, and 12 minutes longer. So Sophia's expression should be p plus 12. Okay, and then it says express t in terms of p. So it says if Sophia took t minutes to jog around the park, so this we know is t is Sophia's total amount. It says express t in terms of p. So whenever it says express and then it has a variable, that variable has to come first in our linear equation. Okay, so this is going to be our dependent variable because it changes based upon Hannah's amount, because we have Hannah's amount that's by itself, that's independent, and then we add to it to get Sophia's amount, so that's the dependent variable. You'll need to know this, remember, for chapter 9, because otherwise your graphs and your linear graphs in chapter 9 will be totally wrong. So t is equal to, I can just move it to the front, p plus 12. So t is the dependent variable and p is the independent variable. And again, that's because the dependent variable changes based upon the independent variable. If you were in my class, remember I said this was because like a baby is dependent upon a parent, like they need you to change your diaper and stuff like that. So based upon what the parent does, the baby will change. Okay, and then going to lesson 8.3. The rest of lesson 8.2 is really just applying this concept into either tables or graphs. And then lesson 8.3 is solving simple inequalities. So just the same exact concept as an equation, but with a greater than or less than symbol. Okay, so on page 22 is the beginning of this lesson. We're going to go to page 24, where you're writing the number line. So it says on number 3 to write a number line and a solution set for P is greater than 23. So you need to have a number line with at least 23 on it. And remember, if it doesn't have the line for equals to, then your dot above 23 is not filled in. Whereas if it's greater than or less than and equal to, then the dot is filled in. Okay, so I have 23, and then it says P must be greater than that. So let's fill this in with numbers. If P was 22, would 22 be greater than 23? The answer is no, that wouldn't work. So I'm going to do 22, one number to the left, and I know I'm not going that way. So my arrow is going to go to the right because it's greater. So I could have 24, 25, 26. So I'm going to do 3 numbers at least to the direction my arrow is going and 1 number to the direction my arrow is not going. And then you put the variable in between your number line and your solution. This part your book didn't show you that you should do, but if you have a formal or a standardized test, it will show you that variable there. And just know that's saying that P could be anywhere from 24 on up. Well, essentially 20 above anything, any decimal or fraction above 23. Okay, so if they showed you this number line without this inequality, you should be able to tell me the inequality that P is greater than 23 based on what you see here. Okay, and then the next section is 8.4, which is real world problems. So I would definitely suggest looking through those, and just like always on the final review, if a problem seems difficult to you, those are the problems you should do and practice. If it's an odd number, check it in the back of the book. If it's an even number, you can ask your teacher after you do it to check it and then correct it if you missed it. Find another problem that's similar and try and do that. And then finally go to the chapter review. There's a couple concept and skill sections on 1 through 22. And then you can go into the more advanced questions, which would be 23 on. And you could definitely do some odd numbers for those. Check them in the back of their book, just like 8.4, and or check the even numbers with your teacher if those are the ones you want to practice. If you're doing the concept ones only, I would definitely think about practicing some of your problem-solving ones. It's up to your teacher whether they're going to require that. However, if you're not practicing problem-solving questions for these chapters, this is a section of your final that you will not probably do as well on as you should. So know that there are not just basic concepts and skills on your final. There are problem-solving questions as well.